you might even say that this is a timeline where we're seeing a successful Steiner's counterattack right now, where the Soviets have entered Berlin and are now probably going to get encircled very soon up here in the Baltic. So very, very good job on for the Germans here. Hello everybody and welcome back to Let's Talk Grand Strategy, where today we're playing Hearts of Iron 4 and asking the question, what would happen if World War II had the borders of World War I? So as you can see, I've gone ahead and changed the borders around quite a lot. So, well, Germany of course owns its parts of Poland that they lost after World War I, as well as Alsace-Lorraine. I've also created a Giga Hungary here that owns everything that Austria-Hungary used to own. The Soviet Union got all the parts of Europe that Russia used to own. Germany also got some of its African colonies as well as some of its colonies over here. I'm just gonna go ahead and say this is not like 100% historical. For example, like HOI4 doesn't have two states here, so I couldn't split up New Guinea in the correct way, and also I haven't combined all the Chinese miners into one giant China, just because that would make them insanely overpowered, and I want to keep this scenario relatively balanced and interesting. So what do these changes mean? Well, first of all, let's also really quickly look at the factions. I've gone ahead and added Hungary to the Axis. Also, as we know, France is going to join the Allies later. So it's going to mean that it's going to happen a little different than historical World War I for sure. Simply because, as you can see here, the Allies aren't all one faction, or the Entente of World War I isn't all one faction here. In fact, as you can see, Russia is still in the Comintern and is still the Soviet Union instead of Russia. So this is probably going to help out the Central Powers a little bit, because it means they can first attack the Western Allies and then attack Russia and don't have to fight a two-front war. At the same time, of course, there's still the United States that hasn't been weakened in any way. Russia has in fact been strengthened quite a lot, or the Soviet Union, I should say, has been strengthened quite a lot by all these new territories they hold. And so it might still, I hope, be a really, really interesting scenario. And yeah, also in terms of resources, if we take a quick look at that, Germany got 170 additional steel here from the French, so that's probably going to help them out. Over in their colonies, over here they don't really have much. Here they have 2 rubber, here not really that much, and here not really that much. So yeah, Germany mostly benefiting from more steel over here. Hungary, of course, now has a pretty decent amount of resources, especially aluminum. I mean, they always have that. Also some steel, especially from Czechoslovakia and those kind of areas. But overall, not super overpowered amounts of resources. On the other hand, though, a very good amount of manpower and a very good amount of factories. In fact, Hungary even starts with more civilian factories than Germany, which is, again, not super historical. Austria-Hungary was, of course, not economically as strong as the German Empire in World War I. But once again, we're not trying to be super historical here, just to have a fun little scenario. And I think, in fact, that with the little resources they have, Hungary is going to have to trade so much that long-term Germany is still going to probably have the better economy here. Russia, if we look at them, pretty decent amount of resources as always. Especially, I think what got boosted for them is the factories. If we look over here, all the Polish factories, all the factories the Baltic states, all the factories of Finland, of Eastern Romania, all now belonging to the Soviet Union. So they start with a pretty impressive sized economy. Yeah, so that's the basic setup. I'm gonna, of course, just be in observer mode, as you can see, and spend the whole game in observer mode. And yeah, I would say let's unpause and start. So also, as you can probably tell already, I haven't changed any ideologies for any of the countries. So very likely we're still going to see Italy join the Axis. Very likely we're going to see France join the Allies and America join the Allies. So yeah, it's not going to be an exact replica of World War I, but I think it's going to be a cool scenario nonetheless. Also, a bit of a wild card in this game that I forgot to mention. Of course, Turkey got all its territories over here, which means that now they have a very decent amount of oil also in their country. And of course, they have a lot more manpower than they have in base game. So Turkey might be not a great power, but at least I'd say a medium power. And yeah, if Turkey joins either side, they might really make a difference here as well. And also think long term, we're going to see a way more interesting war in Africa just because of all of Germany's colonies that they have here. If they manage to supply those colonies, and if Italy joins the Central Powers, then we're going to see a pretty balanced African war with two sides that both have, lots of bases of operation here. So yeah, we're going to see what effects that has and how the African war goes. Another thing to keep in mind is that while the Axis, or the Central Powers, I guess here, have a very decent position in that they're probably going to be Germany, Hungary, and Italy all in one faction. So they're probably going to be very dominant on land in Europe. On the other hand, their navy is still, of course, just the standard navy that Germany starts with in this game, which is not really strong. In World War I, of course, the German navy could, in fact, challenge the Allied, or especially the British navy, while in this scenario, we're still going to probably see the Allies rule the sea. Oh yeah, also, by the way, you probably already noticed, but I don't have any expansions. So yeah, Hungary just has its base focus tree, and we're not going to see Hungary do any too wild things. So they're probably mostly just going to be a support country for Germany, more or less. I just want to really quickly compare some of the industrial stats here. So we see Germany has one full line and one line of 12 civilian factories that they can build with. Hungary has 2 full lines and a line of 8. So Hungary has, as we saw, a lot stronger civilian economy, at least at the start here, before they have to import a lot of resources. If we compared it to some of the allies, yeah, Great Britain 15-2, France 15-1, Italy 14 in only one line. But the real wildcard here, I think, is going to be the Soviet Union. Yeah, they can build, 2 and 5. So that is a little less even than Hungary. Hungary can even build up faster than the Soviets. How is that possible? Because I think the Soviets certainly have a lot more civilian factories. Hungary has 57, the Soviets have 82. So it seems to mostly be a difference of how many consumer goods they have to produce, with the Soviets at 35% and Hungary at 22%. So yeah, that seems to make the main difference here. But again, I think long-term Hungary is going to be really nerfed by not having that many resources. And yeah, already they have to import lots of steel from Germany. And of course, the more they start producing equipment, the more resources they're going to need. So the more civilian factories are going to go into trading, which should long-term balance it out so that Germany benefits from that a lot. Yeah, as I predicted, already now Germany building factories faster than the Hungarians, slower than the Soviets though at this point. I think the Soviets are probably getting a lot of civilian factories from all their exports, and Hungary already having to import materials quite a lot. Yeah, steel, rubber, to produce everything they're producing. Also, the Hungarian army definitely growing pretty quick. They're already at 60 units by now, and at 350,000 men in the field, which is of course still, I believe, lagging behind Germany and lagging behind a lot compared to the Soviets. But again, getting there, getting stronger, and probably really going to be able to help out the Axis powers in this game. The nationalists seem to be winning the Spanish Civil War, even as far as I can see, without any foreign help or foreign intervention. So yeah, that's also probably going to help out the Axis, of course, having another Axis power setting up here in Europe. And the war between Japan and China has just started. Of course, Japan a slight bit weakened probably by not having all these islands, although I don't think there's a lot of valuable resources or in fact a lot of factories anywhere over here. Let's quickly check just to confirm that. Okay, there's a little bit of factories here in the Caroline Islands, so probably Japan starting with 2 factories less than they usually would. We'll see how much that affects them and affects their success in this war against China. I gotta say, in base game, so in vanilla HOI4 without any expansions, I'd say it's about a 50-50 maybe if Japan manages to defeat the Chinese, maybe even less than that. And quite often even you will see China push out the Japanese completely. And we can see Japan here having 20 civilians, 18 military factories. China, on the other hand, 40 civilians, 21 military factories. So China already stronger than the Japanese at this point. Also believe they have better resources overall. Well, about the same. So yeah, either Japan manages to push them back quite significantly at the start of the war and capture some factories from them, or we're probably gonna see the Chinese win this war. All right, we're in mid-1938, and as you can see, Japan is struggling to make any kind of push against the Chinese, and China is outgrowing them economically, so we might not see a Japanese victory here. The Spanish Civil War is almost over, and is most definitely going to be a victory of the nationalists. And our great parts here, the Germans now having, I believe, pretty much the strongest economy in Europe, being able to build with 4 full lines. The Hungarians only at 2 lines at this point. They're really held back by how much they have to import, of course. The Soviets constructing with 3 and a bit, so not building up quite as fast as Germany at this point, but of course they're already having a much bigger economy than the Germans. And meanwhile, the Allies over here lacking behind quite a bit in terms of their buildup. So yeah. Also, if we look at their kind of productions, the Germans are heavily focusing on planes and infantry, so nothing too surprising here. Maybe at most that they're not really building as many tanks as you would expect. The Hungarians focusing very heavily on infantry production, and in fact outproducing the Germans even by quite a lot, which also I think reflects in their army that is already at 860k, the Germans at 840k. So yeah, by now the Hungarians have even got a bigger army than the Germans, but it's a mostly infantry army and not really that much of an air force, although a little bit. The French are producing, well, not that much at all because their economy is lagging behind quite a bit, but are in fact producing more tanks than the Germans or anyone else, if I see that correctly. Yes, or pretty much the same amount. So yeah, they might keep up in terms of tanks, but they're far falling behind in terms of their air force and also probably in terms of their infantry. The British also not that big of a production by now, but mostly also focusing on aircraft and infantry. And the Soviets, in fact, the only country that has a focus on tanks as well, but they have enough factories to pretty much focus on everything. So they are building aircraft, tanks, infantry, everything in good amounts. However, 339 a day, and the Hungarians, yeah, the Hungarians even outproducing the Soviets in terms of infantry equipment. So they're probably gonna build up, well, what is the focus? Sorry, not the focus. What am I looking for? What is the thing here called? Well, a mass assault kind of build up, although they are focusing on the mobile warfare doctrine, which doesn't really make that much sense considering they're not building any tanks. Are they researching any tanks? No, okay. But anyways, that's what we're looking at. So yeah, really, really strong build up for the Axis powers here. The Allies lagging far behind, but the Soviets on the other hand also much stronger than in vanilla. So yeah, as you'd expect, these 3 countries that got most of the new land with the border changes are probably the 3 strongest countries. Also, Yugoslavia got a lot weaker, of course, but yeah. So, I mean, they fall in base game, they're weaker here, so they're probably not going to stand any kind of chance. Turkey, well, yeah, pretty solid economy, not amazing, and also pretty solid army, not amazing. But again, if they join either faction, they might be the ones that make the big difference here. Although so far, they don't look like they're drifting in any of the 3 directions. And does it finally look like the Japanese are making some progress? Yeah, they're making some progress, but I imagine that progress is coming at quite a heavy cost, although the Chinese have already lost a lot more units than them. By the way, also we might see the war start a bit early, because if we look at the focus tree, Germany was of course able to just jump over many focuses here, because of course Austria doesn't exist, Czechoslovakia doesn't exist, so they could just skip those focuses and now don't have all that much left to focus on before they're either going to have to start war with the USSR or war in the West. And I believe the historical focuses are on, so we're probably going to see Germany attack in the west first, and we're probably going to see World War II in Europe start with a German invasion of the Benelux. Oh, also apparently, I didn't think this would happen since Poland doesn't exist, but apparently the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact still meant that Germany got Western Poland here. So that's definitely boosting them a bit. Let's just see what that means in terms of resources. Okay, it's not all that much in terms of resources. It's a little bit in terms of industry, especially here in Warsaw. And it, of course, also costs the Soviets a little bit of industry. But on the other hand, it makes the front line the Soviets have to hold against the Axis a lot shorter. So it might end up helping the Soviets, because it also means that there's no big potential pocket that the Allies could create of Soviet units here around Warsaw. But yeah, overall, a bit weird that happened. I didn't think it was going to happen, but yeah, we're too far into the timelapse, I think, to restart and mod around that. So yeah, I'll just leave it like it is. And there we go. Germany is focusing on the around Maginot part of their focus tree. None of the Benelux countries in the Allies so far, so this might not trigger World War II completely. But yeah, the war's gonna start any day now, and of course, I'm pretty sure we're just gonna see the Germans go through the Benelux, no problem. And then they're gonna have a long front to attack the French. Yeah, other than in vanilla HOI4, we're probably gonna see this not starting World War II completely. Yeah, so far it's only a war against the Dutch and Dutch East Indies. Which Germany's gonna win in no time, I believe. And then probably gonna start the next war against Belgium. Let's just see real quick. Yeah, already defeating the Dutch. Does this mean now? Yeah, no, they're not at war with the Dutch East Indies anymore. Okay, yeah, now going for Belgium, as you would expect. And the East Indies also joining in. Oh, they puppeted the East Indies. That's big, because that means now that the Axis have a strong presence over here, and it means that Germany can import lots and lots of rubber from the now German East Indies. So that, again, might help them a lot. So overall, I think this game is so far heavily focusing or heavily leaning towards a probable Axis victory. Simply because pretty much all the changes are helping them. The only other country that gets helped by having all this land is the Soviets. And with giving up this land, they're not being strengthened that much anymore. But yeah, Germany probably also gonna attack Luxembourg any day now. Okay, not really. And I believe, yeah, they're now focusing on the war with France, which if we look at the kinds of units at the border here and at the kinds of strength of the different armies in this war, this is probably gonna be a pretty easy war for the Germans to defeat the French. We'll see in just a moment. Okay, there we go. So the war didn't even start with Germany finishing this focus. Instead, it started with Germany declaring war on Luxembourg and Luxembourg calling in the Allies into this war. So this war is now a pretty balanced war overall in terms of factories. But if we consider that Germany is gonna very likely defeat the French, then I believe long term we are going to be looking at a very, very strong Axis in Europe still. So far, by the way, Italy has not joined the Axis yet. They are, of course, still a fascist country. But yeah, will be interesting to see if we see the Italians join the Axis. Maybe the Hungarians holding some Italian cores is keeping them from joining. I don't really know how that system works. But yeah, let's look at the war in France. As you'd expect, yeah, it's a pretty easy war for the Germans overall. They're also now attacking the Danish, so that's also going to be another pretty easy war for them, probably. Yeah, I believe it's not that interesting to observe this war right now. We're just going to see the Germans run over France, so I'll show you when they won the war. Oh, also, just as I talked about Italy not joining the Axis, they have now joined the Axis. So if we look at the power distribution, this now means that the Axis have a stronger economy overall compared to the Allies. And that's just gonna get even worse as soon as France falls. So yeah, I really hope the Soviet Union is gonna be able to counterbalance all of this. Otherwise, we might see a very one-sided game. Oh, also, by the way, as I talked about in the beginning, we see now that all these Axis colonies that Germany had in Africa, combined with all the Italian colonies, means a pretty messy and pretty large war in Africa too. We can see the Germans and Hungarians having lots of units here in the center of Africa, the Italians, of course, in East and in North Africa, and France has fallen. So Vichy France now also joined the Axis. A part of it even went to Hungary, which is pretty cool. So now Hungary even has a port on the Atlantic Ocean over here. Overall, as we can see, the Axis super strong. Let's compare the Axis strength here overall. They're at 460 factories and 400 divisions compared to the Soviets at 200 factories and around 250 divisions or something like that, I would say, or maybe 300 divisions. So yeah, I hope the United States and Soviets can still turn this around and make for an interesting war. But again, so far, the Axis winning. Oh my god, the Soviets have 17 million manpower in the bank. So yeah, they're not going to run out of men anytime soon. German invasion of Norway now also happening and looking very successful as well, although they're suffering quite heavily from attrition over here. I gotta say though, as much as this African war is more interesting than any vanilla African wars I've seen, it might end up hurting the Axis, I think. Simply because in base game, usually Germany does not have to divert nearly this many divisions into the African theater. And as long as the Allies manage to hold out, and they are holding pretty well so far, this means, of course, that the Axis powers are losing lots of manpower, are probably suffering from attrition. Yes, they are. So are losing quite a lot of men and equipment down here in Africa. And all that might just mean that when it's time for Barbarossa, for the attack on the Soviet Union, they don't have the same strength that they would be building up right now if they weren't losing so many men in Africa. So we're going to see how that affects it, but that might be some light at the end of the tunnel, if that metaphor makes sense in English. I'm not sure. Some light at the end of the tunnel for the Allies and the Comintern here. A bit of a confusing fact here. If we look at the countries list and look at the major countries, then for some reason Xinjiang is a major country. And I believe if we look at it, it's because they have formed their own Chinese United Front somehow. Something seems to have gone wrong here in creating the Chinese United Front this game. I don't really know, but so Xinjiang is a major power now. Anyways, I thought it might be worth taking another little look at what countries are producing right now. So Germany focusing heavily on infantry equipment, but also building up a decent amount of tanks and air force. The Hungarians focusing almost exclusively on infantry and a little bit on air, but with no tanks in it at all. The British are building a little bit of infantry and lots of air force, so they might be the strongest air power soon. The Italians are building lots of infantry, a little bit of air force, not too much though. And the Soviets are building, well, again, focusing on infantry, but also building a decent amount of tanks and air force. Overall, the Soviets right now are at 2.4 million men in the field. Meanwhile, the Germans are at 1.4 and the Hungarians are at 1.2. So if the war in the East started sometime soon, then at least in the beginning, we might be looking at a very balanced war with the two main Axis powers that would be fighting in the East probably being about as strong as the Soviets. Also in terms of their industry, Germany and Soviets pretty much equally strong. Although I believe the Soviets, they're building with 5 lines and 10 factories on another one. Meanwhile, the Germans are at 4 lines and 6 factories on another one. Hungarians at 1 line and 14 factories on another one. So overall, the Soviets by now the country that's building up the quickest. Although we might be worth looking at the Americans too. They're building up. Okay, they're building up even faster, I believe here. So they're the number 1 industrial power probably. But so far their military buildup is not that great yet. But yeah, I believe Pearl Harbor is still going to happen, even though the Japanese are not really winning against the Chinese and don't even hold all the territory over here. But I believe they're still gonna attack the Americans eventually. And it looks like the Allies are being pushed out of Africa, still holding a couple bridgeheads, especially in South Africa, pretty big amount of territory over here. But yeah, otherwise they are getting beaten in Egypt, getting beaten in Ethiopia, getting, well, somewhat beaten here in Central Africa. So yeah, we might see Axis control of Africa. Also, something interesting I noticed, the Germans aren't even importing any rubber from their East Indian colonies, which, well, might mean either that the trade route is too unsafe with the British Navy and British Air Force blocking it, or that Germany has just built up so much synthetic refineries that it's not really worth it for them. And it's looking like China is winning quite significantly now against the Japanese. They've created a pretty big pocket of Japanese units over here and are pushing deep into Manchuria. So yeah, we might see a Chinese victory in this war, which is of course not going to mean that Japan doesn't attack all the allies anyways, but it is going to mean that Japan won't be all that strong and won't be all that much of a threat to the allied areas over here, and especially to the United States and Britain. So that again might help out the allies in Europe, which might make this a bit more balanced overall. Also, I believe we just saw, yeah, Greece joining the allies now, which, yeah, they might be able to hold out a little bit here, but as soon as Yugoslavia or Bulgaria maybe also somehow come into the Axis, this is not gonna work anymore. And there we go. Germany is focusing on a war with the USSR right now, which is happening quite a bit earlier than in history, probably because they could skip so many focuses in their early tree. Yeah, so let's just quickly look at the numbers. Germany at 300 factories, USSR also around 300, Hungary at 150. Germany has 1.7 million men in the field, Hungary has 1.3 million, so in total they have around 3 million. The USSR at 2.6 million, so slightly behind here. In terms of their air forces, the USSR has in total around 5,000 or so planes, Germany around 6,000, Hungary around 3,000, so we're looking at an air advantage for the Axis. In terms of their different productions, in total, Germany and Hungary have around 150 factories on infantry equipment, 30 factories on tanks, and around 45 factories on aircraft. Meanwhile, the USSR at 30 factories on aircraft, 30 factories on tanks, and 80 factories on infantry. But they're also having quite a significant stockpile of infantry equipment. So overall, we're looking at a slight advantage in terms of numbers and in terms of air power for the Axis, and a pretty balanced field in terms of the tanks. So yeah, let's see how this plays out. Also, by the way, the Pusan pocket is the last little bit of land that Japan holds in mainland Asia anywhere. So, oh, well, never mind. Obviously, they also hold this area over down here right now. So that might be really useful to them also. But yeah, Japan definitely losing this war. And Germany probably going to start a war with the USSR any second now. Speaking of, do they have a non-aggression pact? It looks like they don't have a non-aggression pact with the USSR. So they are likely going to start that war right away. So let's see. Also, by the way, here are the losses against the Allies before the start of the war against the USSR. Interesting that they have so many losses against... Oh, sorry, one second. Interesting that the Germans have so many losses against the British Raj. How did that happen? Did Germany invade anywhere over here? It doesn't look so. Yeah, I really don't know how that happened. Or did maybe the British Raj had lots of units in Africa that I didn't really see. Yeah, they have some units over here. Anyways, we want to see this war, I believe. I'm just a little shocked at Germany a day before the war starting, having one division per tile against the Soviets over here. That does not make a lot of sense if you ask me. Yeah, they declared war now and they have nowhere near the amount of units that they would need to stand a chance here. So this is an Operation Barbarossa this time that starts with the Soviets pushing, Where are all the German units is the interesting question here, because they have over 200 units, of which only like 20 or so are on the Eastern Front. Yeah, only 20 divisions on the Eastern Front. Are they calling in more divisions? Now they're upping it to 25, but that is still obviously not going to be near enough to hold the front line. Let's see maybe the Allied front lines. So yeah, all their allies only focusing on the Hungarian part of this front. So really hope the Germans can move their units in fast enough. Otherwise, we might just see the USSR steamrolling the Germans here. I really don't know where so many of their units are. Okay, they're just like surrounding the Portuguese African colonies. That's, well, I'm just not going to question that move. Yeah. So yeah, so far in the early days of this war, we see the Soviets really moving in quickly. And it's going to be interesting to see if the Germans can stop this steamroller or if they're going to fall very soon. Yeah, Germany slowly increasing the unit numbers that they're sending to stop the Soviets. By now they're at 36 units. The Hungarians, meanwhile, holding really well against the Soviet push, but their front line is getting so overstacked by their own as well as Italian units here that might really end up hurting them. And yeah, Germany still, even though they're slightly increasing the unit numbers here, nowhere near have enough units to really stop the Soviets. If we look at the early war kind of losses here, Germany lost 90,000 against the Soviets so far. Hungary has lost 50,000 against the Soviets, and the Soviets have lost 150,000. So at least, I guess, for the Axis, at least the Soviets have higher losses than themselves. And maybe they can defend this river line here, although it's already been breached in the south, so never mind. Yeah, I really don't understand, to be honest. I'm not using any mods that change the AI in any way. So usually in base game, they aren't that terrible at unit management and wouldn't just have like their whole army running around in the African rainforest here while they're being run over by the Soviets. So yeah, I really hope that the AI is somehow gonna eat some brain pills and stop this in time. By the way, also interesting, I think in most games, if China manages to push the Japanese out of Manchuria and out of Korea, there's a scripted peace deal between the two of them. But in this game, apparently, they have not signed any peace. Maybe it also requires Japan to be pushed out of the south here, so maybe we'll see it after that. Or maybe they're just going to keep this war up. By now, the main front line that the Soviets managed to push is the Hungarian front line over here, simply because I believe it's so overstacked that there's pretty much no org for any of these units. And yeah, meanwhile, they're somewhat stopped around this river line, at least here in the north. Germany has by now upgraded to 41 divisions against the Soviets. Still, of course, way too little, but it seems to be enough to at least slow down their advance quite a lot. Soviet naval landing in Denmark sounds weird, but yeah, that's happening right now, and they even seem to have enough units by now to hold this naval landing, which opens another front in Europe, and Germany already doesn't have enough units to hold this front against the Soviets all that well. Although, well, no, they haven't even upgraded the unit count, still at 39 units, and that's all. One thing here that we can see here pretty clearly that bugs me about Hearts of Iron is, or Hearts of Iron 4 specifically, is that only the, well, put it this way, a faction leader, as we can see here, will move units in to help smaller countries on the front line. However, the smaller countries are not going to move units in to help the faction leader along their front line. And so in a situation like this, where there's a faction leader and another strong country next to it, this will mean that there's a pretty big overstack of units in the smaller country's front line. Meanwhile, the front line of the faction leader is, well, relatively empty. Yeah, if you've ever played the World War I mode for Hearts of Iron 4, you probably noticed this, that it's also a big problem there. And of course, since we kind of recreated those borders here, we also see the same problem now here. Yeah, Germany now at 46 divisions, again, slowly increasing their numbers here. But then also they start sending divisions into this no supply zone here in Hungary. So overall, that might still not be enough. And Japan is now justifying against the Philippines, which will of course lead to a war with the Americans too. So that's going to bring America into the Allies, and we already so far are seeing the Axis overall not doing all that well in Europe. Okay, and we're seeing a counter push that has at least some amount of success against the Soviets now. It also seems the Germans have at least moved in enough units now to pretty much stabilize the front line and not get pushed back any further. So yeah, overall this might be a turnaround, but we'll see. Interesting, so Japan has declared the war against the Philippines and thus brought the United States into this war as well, of course. However, the United States have somehow not joined the Allies as a result of that. So that might again help out the Axis a little bit, that at least they don't have to fear any big United States D-Day. Well, although the United States are already stationing a lot of units in Great Britain. But yeah, so far the front line in the east has stabilized pretty much. Both sides are trying to push against each other, and both sides are making very, very little gains for very high costs. We see here 700,000 and 900, so already like 1.7 million losses for the Axis, and oh well, never mind, something like over 2 million losses for the Axis against the Soviets, and also 2.7 million losses of the Soviets against the Axis. So yeah, millions of dead, not really any movement. And the United Kingdom has landed in southern Greece now, and at least so far it looks like they have managed to build up a pretty stable bridgehead over here. So we'll see how this affects the war. Also, the Soviets are doing naval invasions all along the Baltic, as we can see over here, and as you know already have landed in Denmark and pretty much secured all of Denmark by now. I wonder how this comes, like the Soviet Navy doesn't appear that strong. Did the Germans just lose? Well, it seems like the Germans have lost most of their Navy, probably against the United Kingdom. The UK is still going really strong in terms of its Navy. I assume the same is true for the United States, and indeed it is. Has Japan lost much of its Navy? A little bit, but they still got a pretty sizable Navy overall. By the way, also it's barely noticeable because they're only doing it bit by bit, but it seems like Germany is giving more and more of its occupied regions in France to the Hungarians, which is of course not going to make them any stronger. And we are, oh my god, Berlin has fallen. We are in fact seeing a very successful naval invasion by the Soviets here. Very smart strategy, I gotta say, for the Soviets to navally invade, because their overwhelming advantage in numbers against the Germans isn't really all that helpful when the front line is this short. So yeah, making the front line longer like this, definitely a smart move for the Soviets here. They're already at 400 factories now, the Germans only at 250, Hungary at 200. So overall still a factory advantage for the Axis probably here, but still I'd say it's looking very, very well for the Soviets, even without any American help. By the way, at least the Germans have finally decided that the European front is the more important front than Africa, and have moved over 100 units now to the Eastern Front and over 100 units to the Berlin Front to hold against the Soviets, and are in fact even starting now to push the Soviets back, so there might still be a chance for them. And the Germans are retaking Berlin right now and are overall somewhat managing to push the Soviets back in their landing over here. I believe the Soviets have somewhat run out of organization, as it looks, because of their constant attacks towards the Germans. And also the Hungarians making slight advances down here now. You might even say that this is a timeline where we're seeing a successful Steiner's counterattack right now, where the Soviets have entered Berlin and are now probably going to get encircled very soon up here in the Baltic. So very, very good job on for the Germans here. Right now the Soviets are at 3.93 million losses, and they're probably going to lose a lot of units over here very, very soon. So we're going to see how many units die in this encirclement. Yeah, they've lost the last port over here, so now they're completely out of supply, and there's over 30 units in... Sorry, stopped recording there. I wanted to actually open the losses statistic and not stop the recording. So yeah, if you look, 3.99, and after this encirclement is closed in just a second. now we're looking at 4.25, so 250,000 Soviet units, somewhere in that ballpark, in that encirclement. Another encirclement forming up here, and yeah, the Germans have once again managed to push the Soviets at least back to around the Danish border, or somewhere somewhat south of the Danish border, and are also still very well holding on in the east, so they might still be able to turn all this around. It looks pretty well for them so far. Yeah, it seems like the Germans, with some help from Venezuela, are now able to reconquer Denmark from the Soviets, which is a sentence you don't say very often. And we're seeing D-Day, which happened around Le Havre and Dieppe over here. I'm certainly mispronouncing those. But it's only the British, of course, with no American help, so we're probably not going to see anywhere near a successful D-Day happening in this timeline. I'm honestly thinking of maybe just going ahead and cheating a little bit to add the Americans to the Allies, just because I believe it would make this whole scenario a lot more interesting. Unless, yeah, let's put it this way. Should the Axis manage to reconquer, say, Brest-Litovsk, of course, the city where the peace deal after World War I was signed with the Russians, if they manage to conquer that, then I'm going to add the Americans to the Allies to make this war a little more balanced and interesting. Because so far the Allies are pretty powerless to do anything against the Axis here. They do manage to hold a little front here in Greece, but yeah, not too impressive. Yeah, the British could even invite the United States to the Allies at any point if they wanted to, but they're not doing it for some reason. So yeah, as I said, if we see the Soviets getting pushed back quite significantly, at least to this city, then we're going to add the Americans to the Allies ourselves, unless they join until then. For some reason, there's some random German and Italian units just cruising around the Indian Ocean. I believe they're probably going to want to go to the German East Indies. Let's just see what that's all about, if we cannot find that out. I mean, not really. They don't really have any front line over here or anything like that, so I don't know. But yeah, anyways, we see another small landing over here. That once again, though, doesn't look all that successful. And how's the Eastern Front going? There's a pretty big push happening against the Soviets. They managed to stop it in most places, but they are being pushed back now in the East. It is January of the year 1943, so I believe that's a good time maybe to take another look at how the war's going. So overall, the front line has changed a little bit in the favor of the Axis, but hasn't changed all that much over here. Yeah, if we look at the factory counts, Germany at 360 factories, 170 of them military factories, Soviets at 390, 200 military, and the Hungarians at 190, of which 90 are military. So overall, still a factory advantage definitely for the Axis here. Army strength, Hungary 1.6 million, Germany 2.6 million. The Soviets are at 2.6 million as well. So once again here, looks like the advantage is on the Axis side. If we look at the air war, it also doesn't look all that well for the Soviets, it appears. Yeah, the air war also pretty decisively going in the favor of the Axis. So yeah, overall, I believe the Axis have managed to turn it around and have managed to not only contain the Soviet landing in Denmark and the Soviet pocket that even conquered Berlin here, but are now significantly pushing the Soviets back. And they are, in fact, one province away from conquering Brest-Litovsk, which, as I said, if they conquer that, that would be the trigger for me to add the United States to the Allies, just to give the Allied Soviet side a bit more of a chance here. I believe if we don't do anything, then this is going to be a slow, well, it's going to go slow, but it's going to be a victory for the Axis here. Lastly, let's look at some losses. The Germans have lost 2.8 million against the Soviets. The Hungarians have also lost 2.8 million against the Soviets. Meanwhile, the Soviets have lost 7 million, of which 5 million against the Germans and 1 million against the Hungarians. So the Germans are doing pretty well against the Soviets. The Hungarians, meanwhile, not doing all that well against the Soviets in terms of numbers. And Brest-Litovsk has fallen, so that is our, well, that is our key here to invite the Americans to the faction. Well, and let's see how that affects the war. Oh yeah, by the way, real quick, since we just added them, let's also look at the ally strength. So the British are at 200 factories, of which 90 are military, and at 500,000 units in the field, and they have lost 1.4 million men. Oh, and let's also call the Americans here, of course. And the Americans are at 470 factories, of which 190 are military. Yeah, the country is almost built up completely. They have an army of 2.4 million. So we're probably gonna see the Americans swoop into the European war soon. And I hope that that's gonna make it somewhat more interesting. So if we look at what the Americans are planning, their early plans seem to be to take out the Axis strongholds in South America here, which definitely makes sense if you ask me. They're also planning some invasions in Europe, and they probably have the kind of numbers to back that up too. I don't see any invasions that they're planning anywhere in Africa, so probably a smart move, to be honest, not to get bogged down in the wars in Africa, because there's just not enough supply there usually. Yeah, and as we can see in the east, yeah, the Axis slowly advancing. So now I guess we basically have the same scenario that you would have in vanilla HOI4, or that the developers intend in HOI4, which is yeah, the Axis slowly winning against the Soviet Union, and the question being if the Allies can land quick and strong enough in Europe to stop the Axis before they eventually defeat the Soviets. By the way, there's pretty much constantly small minor British landings happening in Europe, but none of them have the kind of strength to secure a beachhead for long enough to, you know, really do anything much here. Well, we'll see if that changes once the Americans, with their massive amounts of units, get in here. The Great American Migration across the Atlantic. Oh, and it appears the first American landing in Europe, or it's a British-American joint landing here, is in fact happening in Norway and trying to free Norway. Meanwhile, also small-scale landings happening here in northern France, but so far nothing that could really threaten the Axis here. By the way, Vichy France is also a great power at this point, simply because whenever there's an Allied landing that takes some states here, usually Vichy gets the states as soon as the Axis manage to reconquer them. So that might make it a lot harder for the Allies to land here, simply because there's an actual big French army here trying to defend all this land. And yeah, in the east, it seems now that the Axis are doing really, really well. We have a big encirclement here around, I can't pronounce, Seattle or whatever. And they're really starting to push quite significantly into Soviet territory now. And here we go. There is major Allied landings happening all over the northern coast of France now, with American support, of course. Which is coming just in time because the Soviet front is beginning to really crumble now and really get pushed back quite quickly. So yeah, we'll see if they are successful with the landings here. So far only securing some minor beachheads and getting pushed out of most of them. So yeah, overall this doesn't look too successful. Yeah, the Axis just have too many units here that come in too quickly. So yeah. It seems D-Day has failed, so let's hope we see a bigger D-Day in the future that maybe has more of a chance to actually achieve something here, because otherwise I believe this game is gonna be won by the Axis. So the Soviets have managed to stabilize the front line pretty much at this point, and now are doing a counterattack themselves that has at least some success. So while I still think long term they are going to lose this war simply because the Axis have so many more factories, yeah, it seems like that will still take a long time, if it's even gonna happen at all. Meanwhile, we're still seeing pretty much constant Allied invasions here, all of which are failing. So that's definitely not great for the Allies. The Americans have lost 700,000 soldiers in failed naval invasions against Venezuela, so that's definitely not helping in their war effort. So yeah, it's almost 1944 now, and overall we're looking at a stalemate pretty much so far. The Allies are not able to successfully land. Even in Norway, their naval invasions are usually getting pushed out again. And especially in France, their units never survive for very long. But at the same time, they are taking enough of the Axis attention away from the Eastern Front, so the Axis aren't really advancing all that fast here either. So this might come down to a war of attrition. And in terms of attrition, of course, the Soviets have a lot more manpower to burn through, but so far the situation is not too critical for the Axis either. They all have a pretty good amount of manpower left and can still go to higher recruitment levels. So yeah, this video is already getting really long, so I'm just gonna, well, go away from keyboard for a little bit, just let the game run, come back in a little while and see how the game develops over a longer bit of time. So coming back around mid-1944 now, we're seeing that the Soviets are definitely falling back and being pushed back here in the east. And the other pretty major development, I think, is that the Axis have successfully managed to retake southern Norway, while the Soviets are holding northern Norway, of course. Still though, no successful invasions anywhere around Italy or France, so yeah, not too much of a change in the overall situation, I would say. Alright, after losing in total, well, something like 6 to 7 million units in failed landings in Europe, the Allies seem to have changed their strategy somewhat and are now trying to instead land in North Africa and in Italy. The Italian landings are not going super well, but maybe those North African landings are gonna go better for them. Yes, so far the Allies have pretty much lost, both of them have pretty much lost all of their army several times over. So they aren't really making much of a difference in the war. And meanwhile, the German and Hungarians are outnumbering the Soviets quite significantly. At this point, almost twice their amount of divisions. So yeah, unless the Allies change strategy and become a lot more successful, soon we are going to see an Axis victory, at least in Europe. And Romania has just joined the Axis, not joined, oh, now they have also joined the war. So this increases the frontline length for the Axis. And since they have the unit advantage, I believe that is going to help them out here against the Soviets as well. And it looks like the Allies have successfully managed to land in Morocco and are somewhat pushing the Vichy French back over here as well, which will also draw some Vichy French units away from Europe, so that's certainly good for them. Although over here we see a pretty dumb landing that has no naval base support, so they're probably gonna keep up losing lots of units. They're also getting somewhat pushed back in Greece, so yeah, good for them that they managed to land here, but I don't see this having a huge influence on the war anytime soon. Meanwhile, in the east, the Soviets are getting pushed back across the front slowly but steadily. The Soviets by now are even starting to run out of infantry equipment, and they're still constantly trying to push and completely failing across the front line. So yeah, if they don't stop their pushes soon, and if they in fact, run a huge deficit in infantry equipment, then I believe that's gonna be their death sentence, and that is really gonna allow the Axis to do one major push that is probably going to decide this war. Yeah, also it looks like the Allies are definitely going to lose Greece. They have only 2 tiles left in Greece and I believe no naval base, so they're starving to death slowly there. And then at the same time, the Allies are also losing Norway once more. So yeah, not looking too great for them either. So yeah, by the way, just wanted to show this. The Soviets are producing 1,000 infantry equipment per day. And they still managed to run into a quite significant deficit of 60k. Their army is 3.1 million in total, and they have also lost 18 million men already in this war. Meanwhile, the Germans have a pretty good stockpile of infantry equipment, and the Hungarians as well have a pretty good stockpile of infantry equipment. For some reason, Germany is not really pushing on the front line right now. And also the Soviets managed to produce infantry equipment at such a rate that their losses at least are almost replenished. So yeah, still pretty much a stalemate in mid-1945 now. And in total, let's see, what does this add up to? Around 30 million losses for the Allies total, and another 15, 16 million losses. So over 45 million losses already in this war. Also, just so we're looking at a bit of a different map mode for once, Germany's pretty much built up all its factory slots to the max, so they don't, they can't build all that much more. Same for Hungary, same as Germany, just some occupied territories where they can still build more factories. Same for Italy, just some overseas territories and a little bit here where they can still be building factories. So everyone kind of reaching their limit. How's it looking for Vichy France? Well, they've got some slots left, so they can still build up a little more. The British, well, they've built up everything they can. They already maxed out on the factories. I believe the same is true for the Americans. Yeah, they pretty much maxed out all their factories. So the one major country that is still building factories is the Soviets, who still have quite a lot of factory slots left. Some here on the, well, Chinese-Japanese kind of border in this region, and quite a lot along their front line in Europe. Although maybe it's not that smart to build up here, because if they lose that territory, of course, all the factories are just going to fall to the Axis. But yeah, they're pretty much the only country that's still, only major country, I should say, that's still able to build up more factories. Let's look at some other countries just out of interest. Turkey still has a good amount of slots left. The British Raj still good amount of slots left. I believe China probably also can still build up some more factories. Yes, they can. So yeah, it's mostly the European and North American majors that have maxed out their slots. For some reason, Germany's still not doing a big attack in the east, and the Soviets are getting deeper and deeper into red territory here. And the big German push in the east has begun with a total of 112 divisions. Also, Italy doing some naval invasions in the Baltic now, securing some ports in Finland as well as Estonia. And the Allies still failing to make any landings in Europe and struggling to hold their landings in North Africa. So yeah, honestly, the Soviets holding a lot better than I thought they would, but still overall probably not looking too good for the Soviets here. I'm honestly getting kind of tired here. I've been observing this game for something like 4 hours now, or have the game running for something like 4 hours now. And yeah, not still pretty much stalemate everywhere. So I think I'm just gonna go like shopping and cook dinner and eat, and then in, I don't know, 1-2 hours I'll return to the game and we'll see if there's a winner by then. But to be honest, I'm not so sure about that. Okay everyone, the year is now 1946. I just returned and not that much has happened. The only interesting things I can see is that the United States is finally just about to take out Venezuela. So one success they've had after years and years of war. Let's just see how many losses they've had against Venezuela at this point. Yeah, 1.8 million men, Americans, died in the war against Venezuela here. Other than that, yeah, the Allies have managed to secure a foothold in North Africa as well as Sicily, and are still without any success trying to launch invasions into mainland Europe. But yeah, not much good coming from any of that. The Eastern Front is still a complete stalemate, with neither side making any significant gains in the last 2 or so years of the war since we last checked it out. And overall in the war, we can see super significant casualties: 22 million for the Axis, 18 million for the Allies, and 26 million for the Soviet Union. 16 million against the Germans alone. But yeah, by this point, they're all their industries are so large of all the sides, and they're producing equipment at such a rate that you can't even run out of equipment anymore, even with constant pushes. And all of them still have significant amount of manpower left and can still increase even their recruitment levels. So no side is at a risk of running out of manpower anytime soon either. So yeah, as much as I would like to have some closure for this campaign and see who actually wins, I believe we are gonna have to end it here. And the only thing I can really say is the yeah, we created some kind of 1984 scenario with 3 superpowers in constant warfare, where neither side is really gaining any advantage or really winning the war at all. If we take a final quick look over the world, Japan has managed to take some islands over here, but otherwise still not doing much. Yeah, they're just on their island, chilling mostly. China, yeah, holds all of China and has won against the Japanese, obviously. The losses in the war are 4 million for the Japanese and 3 million for the Chinese, so Japan even losing more units than China. That's pretty unusual. And then in Europe, yeah, we already went over the losses, but let's just go over the individual countries. Germany at 7 million losses, most of them, of course, against the Soviets. Hungary also 8 million losses, most against the Soviets. Italy, 4 million losses, most against the Soviets. The Soviets themselves have mostly lost units against the Germans, but also significant forces against Hungary and Italy. And the United States have lost against, well, Italy, Germany, Vichy, as you'd expect, and Venezuela, surprisingly. UK, pretty similar story. So yeah, I guess that answers the question, what happens if you start World War II with World War I borders? Well, it pretty much turns into World War I in that it's just a stalemate on all fronts and no one ever really wins the war. So that's my answer there. Thank you all so much for watching. Of course, I'd appreciate if you leave a like or maybe subscribe to this channel if you want to see more videos like this in the future. And yeah, see you next time. Bye bye.